Good evening. Welcome to Superpower Broadcasting. I'm your host, Kevin Castley. Thank you for tuning in tonight. Tonight is, of course, debate night, and we've had this scheduled for a couple weeks now. I am debating SpaceHosh here, who has challenged me on nuclear warfare, some elements of that. Basically, how this works is that because SpaceHosh is the challenger gets a few minutes to make opening statements or remarks. They don't have to be prepared or anything, but then we go into free form discussion thereafter. This, of course, is unmoderated. If you out there are watching and are interested in challenging me to a debate as well, reach out to me on Twitter at Kevin Castley. Now, at the moment, due to the inundation with spam, we had to set a 250 follower minimum threshold right now. But if you are an active content creator, I will consider waiving that requirement. If you're somebody who actually creates content, as it may be clear then that there's a chance that you're not going to flake out if you're an actual active content creator. So with that, we got SpaceHosh here. Feel free to make opening statements.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm SpaceHosh. You get to call me Haas or Josh. I'm called both in the real world. I'm a Navy veteran. When I left the Navy, I left as an EMN-3. The EMN stands for Electricians Mate Nuclear, and the 3 stands for Petty Officer Third Class. My primary role was operating electrical distribution systems on the Navy's nuclear reactors. I spent most of my service and training. I left about 3 years in due to a medical condition. Most of it was in training. I didn't actually get out to the fleet. So I won't. Yeah. I consider myself a rational individual, and therefore I oppose nuclear weapons, which I consider to be an irrationality. I understand the value of nuclear deterrence, but I oppose the usage of nuclear weapons in almost any scenario. I think that it is an inhuman device. We don't really understand the impact that nuclear weapons have upon our world. It's sort of like, so for most of human history, warfare has been fought over a battlefield, has been fought over a relatively understandable plane, meaning that it is something that we could comprehend. But a nuclear weapon is essentially bringing the power of the sun, power of the cosmos to our world, to our sphere. 10,000 people being incinerated in a millisecond isn't something that our brains have the capability to really understand. I could try to visualize that, but it just doesn't. Maybe I could think of it as like a scene from a movie, but it's not something that you could really picture because we don't understand it. It's not part of our world. It's not part of our history, and therefore it is a rationality. It's not something that exists within our ability to understand it, and therefore we don't really understand how to use them, and we don't really know where they fit in morality either. That was pretty abstract, and I got a little off the rails, but I'll try to keep my arguments here very much more objective. But I do like philosophy, and I do like the train of thought that leads to nuclear weapons being considered irrationality. But yeah, let's see. There was something else I was going to say. Again, I'm a supporter of deterrence. I'm sort of like Kevin here talked about being a supporter of liberal, but I'm sort of like in the sort of a flip sense of it. I'm pretty far left, but I also am a sort of a conservative in this respect because I support the continuance of the status quo, meaning that nuclear deterrence maintains that it is no more countries get nuclear weapons, no countries lose their nuclear weapons because of how dangerous it is, because of how much on the edge it is of our understanding, because of how easily this sort of situation can barrel out of control. We need to maintain what it is, and we need to work together to reduce what we have, to make sure that we have more control over this irrationality in our society. But yeah.
Okay, yeah, so that was interesting. You read up a few points there. I want to kind of get to it point by point. So one of the things that you opened with was you brought up how nuclear weapons and their effects aren't entirely or anywhere near close to being understood by humanity. Now, I got to say, I've done a fair bit of reading over the years. That statement would be true probably up until the early 1950s. And it would be true for the civilian population up until about the 80s or the 90s. But the fact of the matter is that the United States in particular did over 1,000 tests on nuclear weapons, over 250 of which were atmospheric. and the effects, fallout, etc., yield, etc., were well documented. I mean, there were papers. I've taken a look at some, like it's all declassified, or at least a lot of it is declassified now or sanitized, where a particular burst, just one device in a series like Plumbot, for example, will have like a 150-page write-up on its effects and everything, and dispersal over time and everything. So we actually understand the effects of these things very well. Now, the magnitude, it's the scale of it, the scale of the devastation from a moral angle, from a more humanitarian angle. That's where you say, okay, they're in another league of their own, but they are a well understood league. You know, Alex Wallerstein, of course, did Nuke Map, where he compiles this data and lets you kind of play around with different yields and everything to understand their effects and what they would do, that kind of thing. So they're big, but they're also not infinitely incomprehensible in that sense. They're in that sense, the way that the Russians treat it, for example, is just the next level up from conventional warfare. They don't actually see it as like this sort of untouchable thing. Their doctrine is that they'll respond with nuclear weapons even in a conventional engagement, for example, in a tactical level. So they are something that the Russians are well familiar with too. They did about 700 nuclear tests, and they similarly documented it as well, and the effects very detailed. I mean, again, we're talking about a small burst, even low yield burst, getting a 250-page write-up that's already declassified, never mind everything that they happen to have in the Kremlin or in the Pentagon. And so what this ultimately means is that we're familiar with the effects of nuclear weapons. We understand what they can do. And again, they've literally been used on cities. So some of the effects of it have been backed up by, you know, the data that was attained from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The thing is, here's the problem, right? They're devastating. They're massive. Most of them, at least. I mean, they're very low yield ones too, but the radiological effects of those are still devastating. The problem is, I hear you about the irrationality of it. I mean, it would be a great thing if, as I say, the United States was the only country that ever had nuclear weapons. We'd have a very peaceful and stable world right now. The problem for me is that because our enemies have these things, you're gonna have to come to terms with that. The fact that North Korea, and I would consider North Korea to be an irrational regime, not as irrational as, say, you know, the caricatures. I'm not saying that Kim Jong-un is literally insane. He acts stable most of the time. He's got a plan, but he also has his fits of rage. Iran, in contrast, actually is entirely irrational. They're the type of country that if they were to acquire a nuclear arsenal, even a relatively small one, they would probably use it against Israel. You might say, well, that's irrational. They would die. They're like, yay, they get to go to heaven now and get 72 virgins. So the problem with this is that when irrational actors have these things, well, to them, you know, it might look rational to have them. So therefore, it gets into the question about, well, what do we do about that? They don't have nukes yet, as far as we know. They might have one lying around that hasn't been tested, but North Korea has 60 to over 100, depending on which estimate you go with. So that's the problem, right? This is what I talk about is, well, unfortunately, the status quo right now, and you mentioned, and this is the final point that I kind of want to close on for my rebuttal, is about the status quo. So I view the status quo in the world right now as basically constituted of division between islands of freedom and continents of slavery. So America, Taiwan, South Korea, Australia, Canada are all islands of freedom in the metaphor, and the continents of slavery comprise fascist Russia, communist China, Islamofascist Iran, Syria, North Korea, etc. And so for us, when we look at the status quo, this is inherently unstable. Something's going to have to give eventually. In other words, there will be a war at some point. The question is, how can we avoid that? The question is, how can we try to get this done in as painless a way as possible? You know, how can you denuclearize the Korean Peninsula? How can you bankrupt China? How can you bankrupt Russia without actually having to do with a war with them? And, you know, I'm not sure exactly which tweet of mine, I know it's been a while, which tweet of mine might have spurred you to my to your attention, or if you saw a video of mine. So I know in your case you were talking specifically about, or your opening statements, you were talking specifically about the irrationality of nuclear weapons and everything. I would definitely prefer a world in which only the U.S. had nuclear weapons and that was the status quo forever. like I said, the problem is in the real world, that's not the case. So, yeah.
Yeah, you got to a lot of points there, and I'm not going to touch on all of them because there was a lot. But the first one I talk about is my opening statement was more or less my philosophy on it. I sort of talked about you talking about the objective understanding of these nuclear weapons, like the blast yield, the blast radius, et cetera, et cetera. I was more talking about like our ability to understand that as an individual. Like, can you imagine the distance between the Earth and the Moon? You really can't. It's the cosmos, and a nuclear weapon, I would say, is a cosmos force. But that's all I really say about it. It is something that we don't have the ability to like visualize, and therefore it's irrational.
I would push back on that a little, not necessarily about the moon thing. Like, I've thought about that a little bit, what a light second actually means. And you're like, okay, well, I say I've driven 7,000 kilometers or something in the last 2 years, and it's 300,000 kilometers. You can kind of put that in perspective and say, oh, well, it's like if I were to drive for a century or whatever. With the visualization of the yield, with the visualization of the effects of it, I would say, given 20 minutes playing around with Nuke Map, most people could pretty easily visualize the effects of a 10 kiloton nuclear device going off in their city.
It's just numbers. It's those numbers on the side. You can't actually visualize what the impact it has upon people. But
well,
also,
that's not true. But that's not.
I don't want to dwell on this. This is like my philosophy, if that makes any sense. And I just think I didn't really know what to start as. So first of all, you talked about the tweet that you talked about. You said that a nuclear war is. I forgot exactly what you phrased it, but you said that a nuclear war is winnable in 2021. That was what you were saying. And I assumed what you meant was a first strike against either China or Russia. And I think that's an incorrect statement. I think that's my first contention. But I also wrote down some notes about your opening statement. I do appreciate that you talked about.
I want to just push back on that a little. I don't now. I've tweeted a lot. I've tweeted about 35,000 tweets. About 99% of them have been deleted because I periodically delete tweets to remove any potential ban bait from the haters and traders getting access to that type of thing, and bringing down my Twitter account. So I'm like Destiny with this a little bit, but he's a little bit more proactive. He deletes his, I think, every day. So I don't remember the specifics of that tweet. However, I want to be clear about something. What I was saying was that nuclear war is winnable in 2021. That was an obvious reference. Now, maybe it wasn't obvious to you because maybe you hadn't been following the drama between myself and other actors in interventionist Twitter. Yeah, it was obviously in reference to North Korea because they were trying to tell me that a nuclear war with North Korea is unwinnable. And I'm just like, that's like saying that a nuclear war with Japan in the 40s was unwinnable. It's winnable. It's painful, but it's winnable. So I
would sort of agree with that because most of our interception systems are relatively like close range, so we could put up destroyers near North Korea. And I agree with that. The general premise of that, they don't have as many nuclear weapons, they don't have as much technology. And I guess I didn't understand the context. My assumption was you talked about in one of your tweets that I saw a first strike against Russia. And I think it was a first strike against Russia back in like the 50s when they didn't have the nuclear capability.
Yeah, that was the point, was that, and I'll bring up the graph. I'll actually bring up the graph just so that we can visualize this right now and discuss. Relative nuclear arsenals, about 10 to 1. It was 2,200 versus about approximately 23,000 roughly in the early 1960s on the US side versus about 2,200 Soviet side. Graph of nuclear warheads through the Cold War. Now, obviously, the Soviets caught up and surpassed the United States, but we'll go and bring up that graph because that a lot of people said that they said that to Curtis LeMay, for example, that a nuclear war was unwinnable, and Curtis LeMay dismissed those people as hysterical, basically, and he was correct about that. He wouldn't have been correct about that in the 70s or the 80s, but in the early days, the U.S. had a definite advantage in terms of warheads. It was about a 10 or 11 to 1. I'm just going to see. For some reason, it didn't go into the files. Bring this up. Okay, there we go.
My contention with that stance wasn't the feasibility of it, but the morality of it, because you seemed in your responses to be seeing that as a solution to the Cold War, as that would have solved all the conflict that would have resulted from the Cold War, all the the Vietnam War, the Korean War, because you're talking about the 1950s. I mean, absolutely, the United States could have nuked Russia. And the fact that was a very popular stance back then, everyone was like, we got to nuke Russia, we got to nuke Russia. And I would say it was feasible up until like 1959 when they had ICBMs. And that was that sort of conflict because we could shoot down the bombers, et cetera, et cetera. When the Russians started developing a nuclear triad, that no longer became feasible to win a nuclear war. Because in my opinion, if a single city, if you're talking, I think a nuclear war by itself, the idea of it is an immorality and it is a loss of humanity in of itself. But you're talking about this objective from your perspective. In my opinion, if a single U.S. city is hit by the nuclear weapon, that is a lost war in my mind.
That's one thing that you brought up when you had your statement challenging me. And I wanted to push back on that a little. I know that this is going to sound, insane. Dr. Strange loved that. It does. Thing. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's what we can debate about. So let's say we got a scenario right here. Let's say the year is 1953. The United States does a nuclear war on the Soviet Union. First strike, has the advantage, takes out most of their stuff before it can even get off the ground, takes out their industrial centers and follows that up with a conventional invasion later on that results in a complete and total surrender of the Communist Party.
You got it all figured out.
Now, in that though, the United States, let's say, loses one city. Let's just say the United States, in this example, loses Anchorage, gets nuked by a Soviet bomber that manages to get through. Now, is that tragic? It's absolutely tragic. But bear in mind, World War II was won, and yet Pearl Harbor happened. So it was tragic what happened at Pearl Harbor. Almost 2,500 people killed. But was the war unwinnable? No, the U.S. won that war. It just meant that a lot of civilians died in the process, unfortunately. Likewise, here, you're talking about potentially tens of thousands of people being killed, or even hundreds of thousands of people being killed. But in the 1950s, with what they had, probably tens of thousands of people being killed in one U.S. city. That'd be awful. That'd be tragic. But then we have world peace thereafter, basically, because now there's no.
We just have world peace after we nuke an entire country, leading to the largest, refugee crisis in the history of mankind. You've destroyed all the social structures. Bam, we just have world peace. That's how it works.
So the bulk of the conflict during the era that followed that it stemmed from Moscow and the U.S. Cold War, right? So if the Cold War is over and they're now a capitalist liberal state under U.S. direction. Yes, yeah.
What?
Well, that's what happened with Japan. It'd just be like Japan on a larger scale.
Sure. So this is a huge point that I want to stress here. You have this idea of that you have this plan like from Hawaii 4 where you're just like putting all the troops in the little pieces in places. But the mistake that humans make at nearly every turn is assuming they have the ability to control the effects of their actions. You nuke every single power system in Russia, you blow up Moscow because you have to nuke Moscow. Am I crazy there? You nuke Moscow, you nuke all the social structures. You have a vast country that's much larger than Japan, much larger in population, much larger. It's the largest country in the world. You've destroyed all the social structures. You now have a warlord state. You now have guerrilla warfare. You now have mass refugee crisis. You have millions of people living on the street, killing each other because they don't have any food. This is what you're assuming that you can control this. That we nuke Russia, we nuke all of Russia. Then the communists are gone, and our troops roll in, our brave boys, and they control everything. And everything. It's a liberal capitalist country now. What an ignorant thing to say. That's not. We've tried to do that in other countries. We invaded Iraq. We invaded Afghanistan.
Yes, and Iraq is 1,000 or 10,000 times better off today than under Saddam. Would you disagree with that?
Hold on a second. Say that again.
Iraq today is 8,000 and 10,000 times better off today than under Saddam, and the region is 1,000 times more secure.
I thought under Saddam. That was my confusing.
Saddam, like Saddam Hussein, the dictator, that butchered that country and sent 1.5 million Iraqis to their deaths over his tenure.
Well, I think if Afghanistan would be a better example because we spent all that time and money trying to control this area, and then within like a year of us leaving, it's gonna collapse again. That's my point.
Biden, that's because White Flag Joe surrendered, right? And there was, in the span of the Afghanistan war, you'd probably be aware of this, for only about 2 of those 20 years was there serious, and I'm talking serious troop presence committed there. That was under Obama's surge. Now, Obama did the surge and he gets credit for that, but then he loses all that credit because he withdrew it prematurely. The point is,
we just need more troops. We just need more violence.
Well, no. It's not just more troops. You also have to have a firm commitment to nation building there and establishing a
we do that with
self-sustaining
violence.
democracy. With which?
We do that with violence. We nuke them. We drop nukes everywhere.
I'm not saying nuke the Taliban. I've never said use nukes in Afghanistan.
I'm parroting your attitude regarding Russia, where you think that if we nuke Russia, we'd be able to create a liberal democracy.
Well,
throughout the entire Cold War,
no.
The Soviet Union fell, and we still failed to create a liberal democracy. What makes you?
But that's not true. But that's not okay. Yeah, so that's not true. So here's one thing that you're missing is that we actually got lucky in the Cold War. Now, there was an incident that happened in 1983. In 1983, on this graph, is when the Soviets had quite a few more nukes than the United States, where the Soviet Union, this was during the midst of the Able Archer exercises that NATO was conducting, which were practice games for a nuclear strike on the Soviets. Soviets satellite detected what it thought was a nuclear launch coming from the American Midwest. It alerted. Yeah, so you're aware of what happened with Stanislav Petrov. The point is, if he had just decided to follow orders, the Soviets would have accidentally just nuked the U.S. and then the U.S. would have retaliated. We actually got lucky that we didn't have 70,000 nuclear weapons exchanged. And so, if you said to me, would you rather have a guaranteed victory in 1953 with some casualties, or would you rather have, say, a 5 or 10% chance that there's a huge nuclear war by accident down the road if we wait and let them build up more nukes than you've got and we don't take them out beforehand, and then it's the end of the world, basically. So
I'll try to articulate what I'm saying a little bit more clearly. My issue with this line of thought is that you're assuming that you know what will happen. You will assume that if we nuke Russia, X will happen, this will happen. And I wanted to bring up a few points here. So, as I said, we always make the mistake of thinking that we're in control of everything. If we launch the first strike against Russia, we open Pandora's box of uncertainty. There's so many different questions that stem from this that we just don't have answers to. How would this affect global crop yields? This could lead to famines, and famines are the most basic sense of war. I mean, that's where most wars originate from for most of human history. It could lead to violent warlord period. There could be protracted guerrilla warfare. I mean, not to mention the refugee crisis from Russia, because it was comparable to the United States in population at the time. You have the spread of diseases. You have violent reprisals. They have all these things. If you annihilate a society, you've created the conditions for a cascade of violence that you just don't know how to control. You've removed all the social structures, you've removed all the cities, you've removed all the military, and you're just going to move in with U.S. troops and being fine. I know that you compared it to Japan, but it's not comparable to Japan.
Well, no, I'm not saying it's directly comparable to Japan. What I'll say
not
is
at all
this.
Comparable.
What I'll say is this: you would prefer a stable order, a stable totalitarian order that's aiming 40,000 nukes at America by the 1980s, than what I want to do, which is destabilize it, end it, and impose my hegemony over it, and have the world.
Saying murdering millions of people.
Well, but you're missing the point, right? How many people would have died if the Cold War accidentally went hot in the 80s? Because you run that simulation 1,000 times over, probably in a couple hundred of those, there's a nuclear war. There's a nuclear war between. Well, no. I'm saying I'd rather have a hot war with the Soviets in 1953 than take a chance on a hot war with the Soviets in the 1980s when they've got even more nukes than you. You get the point? Because what I'm ultimately concerned about at the end of the day is posterity, and I'm concerned about morality and values. And for me, I want liberalism for all the future generations to come, no matter where they're born in the world. I'm not willing to just forfeit half of the world or 2/3 of the world's population to permanently living under horrible misery because their dictators happen to have the magic nukes that mean that we can't do anything to interfere in their regimes. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in Western and American hegemony the world over, so that we can give every child born thereafter chance at prosperity, democracy, capitalism, all these great things. Now, you mentioned you're a leftist, and your defense of the Soviet Union here, I got to ask you, to what extent are you sympathetic to the Soviet Union?
Are you kidding me?
During the Cold War? No, I'm serious.
You're talking about murdering millions of people, and why would I defend millions of people? Why would anyone do that? That seems like a crazy thing to do.
The U.S. murdered millions of people in World War II. Wouldn't you want to get rid of fascism?
I think that it's not a comparable situation. First of all,
right? Because my dear communists, my dear comrades, right?
Okay, this is senseless. This is nonsensical. I'm talking about millions of people being, like, women and children walking home from school being incinerated, having their dog be shredded by glass, and you think I'm defending communism here? Are you kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me? Okay, so let's
So
okay.
you're serious, right? Because we're trying to have a conversation about the reality of the world. There was a likelihood. Like, are you denying? Like, do you think that there was 100% chance that if you just let the Soviets get more nukes than you, go from having a couple thousand to having 40,000, you think that it's guaranteed that they're never going to use them? Because in that example, they wouldn't use them on purpose per se. They would have just been retaliating, except they didn't know. So why would you take that chance? Why wouldn't you guarantee victory now? That's my criticism of Eisenhower and Truman, was that they had an opportunity in the late 40s and the early 50s to just end this divided world once and for all and have an American order for eternity. And they got spooked because the Soviets had a few low-yield nuclear devices. So
I watched some of your videos beforehand, and I had no conceptualization for just how far off you are. Are you talking about American hegemony for eternity after we nuke the world? Do you think?
Well, I don't mean literally eternity. I mean for as long as humans are a thing in the universe. Yeah. So.
Are you kidding me? Do you think America's going to be around for that long? Anyways, I want to.
Who would oppose America? No. Hold on. If America makes it clear and lays down the law after this, then nobody else ever seeks nukes. Who would ever rise? Who would ever?
If you bother us.
Yeah, and you just made sure that millions of generations would grow up never having to worry about starvation and gulags and secret police and terror. Everybody gets to live in liberal democracy forever afterwards. That's a fair price. I'll take that price any day. Anyway,
this is like a perfect example of what I'm talking about. You're assuming that you know what's going to happen. So here's my
I know the Soviets aren't going to be around to fuck around anymore. That's what would happen.
Yeah, because all the problems of the world originate from the Soviet Union.
A lot of them did. A lot of them did, especially in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and even the early 1990s.
It's a great thing that they fell, because now the world is perfect and everything's in its own little pieces. Everything's great. So I'm glad that that you weren't around during the 1950s. I'm glad that cooler heads prevailed. I'm glad that cooler heads prevailed, because this is like an insane line of thought where you're doing this math equation of like who is lost. Because what actually happened is the nuclear deterrence happened. We had this system where the two largest countries in the world, who are gunning for each other, didn't go to war because of nuclear deterrence. And as a result, it became the Cold War instead of the hot war where millions of people were incinerated in nuclear fire.
And as a result of that, literally hundreds of millions of people, not just in the Soviet Union, but also in what went on to be their client states in North Korea and China and Vietnam, etc., lived in misery, and many died. Over 100 million died because of communism, way more than would have died in any potential nuclear exchange in the early Cold War. No. That's bullshit. That's bullshit. The U.S. strikes on the Soviet Union, say in the early 1950s, no way would they have killed 100 million people. You're out of your mind. You don't know the numbers if that's the case. You've
done the little map. You predicted everything. But
I've done my research. I guess I'm guilty as charged. I'm not like Ollie, who didn't do any of his research before basically doing this exact debate with me a week and a half ago. Great. I'm guilty as charged. I did my research, bro.
I did a lot of research, bro. I looked at DIA documents. Okay, so here's my main point.
Good for you, yeah.
Here's my main point. You drop, what level of nuclear exchange are we talking about? How many nukes did you drop on Russia?
A few hundred versus what they had, a lot less than that. So
do you know that? Have you heard about the dynamic between India and Pakistan currently, where an exchange between them with a few dozen nukes could release enough dust into the upper atmosphere to starve 1 billion people?
Oh God, we're doing the memes. Oh my God, we're doing the memes. We're doing the fucking memes.
Nuclear winter is?
No. Okay, you did the meme. He did the meme. Okay, you did the meme. Okay, nuclear winter. I can't believe
it's a liberal.
I can't believe I have to go over this again. Holy shit. Okay, so nuclear winter is a massively overstated meme that was basically hyped up by pro-Soviet sympathetic scientists in the 70s and 80s that were desperate to defend their allegiance to Moscow, basically. And we're like, no. You might think you can win or whatever, but you can't, because my climate's basically. Here's the problem with those models. Here's the problem with the nuclear winter. Yeah, no, here's the problem. Yeah, well, better than communist scientists, absolutely. I'm not a communist hack. I'm not a communist hack. So one of the techniques for me to sympathize one of the techniques that the leftist scientists would do was they would basically assume that the nuclear exchange happened in the summer, so that the effects of it as they came around to the fall and into the winter they would seem harsher than they actually were because of the natural cooling of the northern hemisphere at the time as a result of the seasonal change due to the shift of the Earth relative to the sun, seasons, all that good stuff. So they made it quite a bit more colder than it would actually be, ceteris paribus. Now, it could take place in the summer, don't get me wrong about that, but it's a nice little trick to try to make it seem worse. The climate scientists today do a lot of these tricks too, to try to make like the global warming memes and everything. No, I think global warming's anthropogenic, but the extent to which it is overstated by the Russians so that we don't compete with them on oil and gas, because that's where they get. That's where they get.
Oh my God.
That's where they get. That's where they get like 67. Yeah, so that's where they get like 67% of their export from to continue their fascist regime and their wars.
Now. Okay.
Fascist now? They've been fascist since the mid to late 1990s. What are you talking about?
What?
The entirety.
Boris Yeltsin? You consider Boris Yeltsin
you think
a fascist?
He's a Democrat? You think he's a Democrat? Absolutely.
I think he's a shithead, but like.
No. He was a fascist. Are you kidding me? He was a mafia bro fascist. Are you really want to debate this? You want to debate this? He was a fascist. Absolutely. Sure. You think he was a Democrat? He backed up Milosevic in the fucking Balkans. Are you fucking kidding me, dude? You think he was some Democrat?
Do you understand what fascism is?
Absolutely.
Is it people I don't like? Is it just bad things? Bad things are fascist.
No, because some bad things are communist. So obvious. Okay.
So can you explain to me how Russia today is fascist? Because I've actually taken college level courses on this, and it's more commonly described by academics as being a kleptocracy, where you have this oligarchical rule. It's a den of thieves. Fascism is a very specific thing. It's a very specific social movement. It's not just when big government does bad things or. Yeah,
I never said that it was. So I took about 4 courses when I was in university on modern Russia and modern Russian history. I'm well familiar that you could say they're a kleptocratic oligarchy for sure, but a kleptocratic oligarchy is a little bit brushing past the point that the Kremlin does constitute a fascist system. So as far as I consider fascism is basically,
it's not about what you consider fascism to
be.
But
you're not even letting me give my definition right now. So if you would just calm down for a moment. So basically, a fascist system is a reactionary, and the key word here being reactionary or far right or ultra conservative, revanchist sort of racially or ethnically chauvinist movement by the state, basically, to mandate and impose their norms, their ideology, their overall sort of ethic and way of life on all the people by force to conform to the will of the state and the leader, and in which the means of industry, the means of basically the economy at large are ultimately bent to the whim of, in this case, the Kremlin, which is absolutely true. You can look at this in that you could be the richest man in Russia. For example, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, he was $15 billion. He was the richest man in Russia. And sure, he was a kleptocrat, he was an oligarch and everything. But then one day, he was a rye of Putin, and now all of a sudden he has to flee to Switzerland without even a penny, basically. So you can, like, everybody who's there is an oligarch. Here's the problem. When we talk about an oligarchy and we talk about a kleptocracy, we're thinking of this big group of various kind of mafia type guys. That's what Russia was like before the mid to late 1990s, early 2000s. That's kind of what they were characterized by. But today's Russia, not really so much. All those oligarchs have to kiss the ring. All those oligarchs, they actually just are subservient to the central authority at this point. And in fact, in that sense, coupled with the ultra conservatism, the blend of the Russian Orthodox Church with the state, the absolute violent crackdown on anybody that tries to live their own truth in contravention of the basically the ideological hegemony from the Kremlin of like, more traditional Christianity coupled with ethnic chauvinism, patriarchy, all that kind of bullshit. You're going to get the shit beaten out of you, or worse. Look at what they do to gay people, for example. Look at what they do with pro-democracy protesters. Look at what they do with anti-corruption protesters. You can't, like, honestly tell me, oh, no, they're just an oligarchy, but they're not, like, fascist or anything. A lot of countries out there can be described as oligarchical, but it doesn't necessarily make them fascist. It's the extent of the central authority, the far right social bent to it, reaction, that kind of thing. All these coupled together, yeah, they're fascist Russia just as much as China's communist China. Absolutely. So are you going to make the case for them not being fascist in 2021? Because that's crazy to me. So
I've had some conversations with my professor about this and other people, and you have to find some very specific elements, I would say, to describe something as fascist. And being generically like chauvinist, like you're talking about conservatism. Russia is pretty conservative. I mean, the Communist Party of Russia publishes a lot of these, like they co-sponsored the gay propaganda law. Like being conservative, like socially conservative, isn't enough for me. And
no, I didn't say it was. I didn't say that was it alone. I talked about the central authority. Yeah.
Let me finish my thought. And like having a centralized authority, it also isn't fascism. Fascism is a very specific social movement and a reaction, usually to a cultural humiliation, like you saw in Germany after World War II. Or it is also talking about the revival of fascism is more specifically started around mythos. You have to find like certain mythos for me to consider it. Like the Germans were talking about the Aryan mythos, the Italians were talking about the Roman mythos, and Russia, like as I said, like Putin fucks up with oil billionaires not because they weren't ideologically pure. They just challenged what he did. He's the biggest crook of all. Doesn't make him fascist. It just makes him a big shithead.
Well, no, but you mentioned yourself the mythos and the humiliation and everything, and you said, well, Germany in the 30s or whatever, or Russia in the 90s. I mean, look at Putin. Look at all of their romanticization. You watch Russian film, you look at Russian literature, you look at Russian media that comes out today in modern times. What's a lot of it about? It's about basically glorifying the Tsarist era, but also blending in with that, glorifying Joseph Stalin. And so Putin is he in terms of giving the image and branding of his state, melds the conservatism of the Tsar with the authoritarianism and the mechanized authoritarianism of Stalin, and blends those two together and says, oh, well, the Yankees, they may have defeated us, but we shall rise again, and all this kind of stuff. It's classic fascist aesthetics and rhetoric. I mean, you can look at Umberto Eco's sort of description of fascism as well. I don't really use that definition in terms of characterizations. Yeah, but I mean, but this is the thing you're talking about. Well, no, fascism is specific traits, and they all have to kind of be together. But I'm like, any of those that you bring up, I can specifically point to how Russia, the Russian Federation today, fits that actually to a T pretty well. I mean, they are in a way analogous to the Third Reich rising up, basically. Now, I'm not comparing Putin to Hitler here, but what I am saying is that
Goodwin's Law,
the Nazis, they definitely hyped a lot of their anti-Semitism and their conservatism and all that on the humiliation and the mythos around that. You look at Russia and the mythos of the great Russian people, the mythos of the good Tsar, the mythos that Putin is just looking after his children and fighting the evil Jews and Yankees and all this kind of stuff. It's fascist. I mean, we can go on. You studied Russia.
Anti-Semitism.
And there's a lot of anti-Semitism in Russia as well.
I'm aware of anti-Semitism, but is Putin explicitly, like the regime, explicitly anti-Semitic? I wasn't actually aware of that.
Oh, you're not aware of anti-Semitism in Russia? Okay.
I said I was aware of anti-Semitism in Russia. I said, is the regime explicitly anti-Semitic? This is a question.
Yeah. So the regime, it's chauvinistically privileged to the Russian Orthodox Church and collaborates with Muslims in Chechnya, like Kadyrov, where they had to form the status quo, where Putin and Yeltsin had tried to take full control over Chechnya, but they couldn't manage it. So they had to basically keep like these sort of puppet but designated privileged leaders in place in Chechnya and some of the other regions there as their boys, but they were allowed to be Muslim basically. But basically Jews are not very well regarded by the Russian state. Putin often talks about these conspiracies. He talks about George Soros. He does a lot of fear baiting about George Soros. And he does a lot of fear baiting about the New World Order. And he talks about, basically like, he talks about Israel, obviously, cultural Marxism, this type of stuff. A lot of these memes that you can basically interpret as anti-Semitism. And if you would disagree with that, like, it's very clear what he's doing.
That's
you
a
look
very
at that.
flimsy connection.
But I'm also talking about their domestic propaganda. Look at their foreign export. You watch Russia Today. You look at the memes that they promoted. You look at their campaign to work with people like David Duke, obviously alt-right figures, as well as like Black Lives Matter leadership too, which they do. They do that, by the way, because they want them to fight, but they also recognize that both the far left in America and the far right in America are both anti-Semitic and anti-intervention. Wait, you disagree? Wait. You disagree
I
that the
have never
far
encountered
left...
anti-Semitism.
Hold on. So you're now identifying as a far leftist, because before you were just a leftist. Now you're a far leftist.
I'm not going to get into this. This is nonsensical.
Yeah, you're not going to get into it because it kind of casts doubt. It kind of does cast doubt on your statements about the Soviet Union if we know that you're a communist, right?
So hold on. This is the thing I still haven't gotten over. The fact that I sympathize, that I empathize with the idea, that I was to a degree shocked by the idea of murdering millions of people, and you accuse me of being a communist sympathizer because of that, because I think killing millions of people is bad, because that's what you're talking about. So you think it was
bad? Do you think it was bad to firebomb German cities in World War II?
I do, actually. I do think Dresden was bad. That's my
God. Okay, so to you, I got to ask you a question right now. Like, I'm not saying that this is comparable to Operation Unthinkable or anything, but I got to ask you. I'm surprised I didn't get to this earlier. If you were Harry Truman in 1945, would you have used the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
That's a nonsensical question.
No. You got to answer that, bro. Are we seriously going to dodge this? Or are we seriously going to dodge this right now?
You're going to ask me if I would be a president and I would nuke people. And you know that.
Well, Harry Truman was a president and he did. I've got a question for you. Would you have used atomic weapons on Japan to end the war? Would you have done it?
No, I wouldn't have.
So you would have sent 1 million young Americans to get murdered.
Here you go again with saying what's going to happen. You have all the things planned out. Do you know why?
How are you going to force them to surrender when they were almost evenly split after Nagasaki got nuked, if you're not willing to use nukes? Not to mention, you would get lynched if people ever found out that you were president and had these things and didn't use them and sent all those kids to die in the meat grinder on Han's shoe.
You know exactly what's going to happen in the future, always. So here's the big issue with this, is that I watched your video about Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and this is something that stuck out to me. You talked about how Japan in Tokyo was completely leveled with 500,000 people dead, right? That's
approximately.
That was more than Hiroshima or Nagasaki, right?
That's right. Yeah.
What makes you think that it was the bombing of Japan, these two bombs, that made Japan surrender when all their cities were being leveled, rather than the Soviet Union joining the war? Because they wanted to.
Let me finish. Dude, you sound like Stephen Cohen right now. You know that you sound like Peter Lavelle, dude. You sound like Peter Lavelle right now, dude.
I don't care who I fucking sound like. Let me finish my thought. It wasn't because they were afraid of the Soviet Union. It's because they were constantly trying to negotiate peace with the Soviet Union, because they believed that the Soviet Union was going to let them have more negotiable terms. When they saw that wasn't going to happen anymore, the Japanese high command gave up. That is essentially what happened. This isn't a meme. This is history. I am a history major. I know what I'm fucking talking about.
Okay, look. Okay, yeah, you're a history major.
Mr. Russian Today is working with Black Lives Matter. What the fuck are you talking about?
Okay, except that's literally empirically verified that the internet research. Yes, that the
Russia has their fingers in everything. They're the secret force in society.
Well, yeah, because we're very weak on opposing them. Our intelligence is nowhere near.
Our society is so weak. We are.
Not our society. Our political leadership needs to do better to counter Russian connivance. Now, I'm not going to let you dodge these few points, so I'm going to hold you to account on each one of them. I want to first. Well, you tried to dodge the Hiroshima and Nagasaki thing, but then you had to take the mask off and admit that you wouldn't have actually used them.
I wouldn't have killed millions of people, 100,000
people. Millions of people. We're talking about 200,000 people. 200,000 people. I wouldn't have killed
200,000 people. I'm not this inhuman person. I'm not.
It's inhuman in its total war to bring an end to the war. To bring an end to the war as soon as possible. So I'm going to go through your points. So I'm going to go through your points. So I'm going to go through your points one by one here. So the first point was, I'm not going to let that Black Lives Matter thing slip. This is proven that the Internet Research Agency, which is based in St. Petersburg and funded by the Russian government, which employs internet trolls that get paid about 2.5 times to 3 times the national salary average in Russia to do pro-Russian memes and manage Facebook pages and all kinds of various social media stuff that are directed at American audiences. They'll create like, California Secessionist Party or whatever on Facebook, and it's like it's based in Siberia, this sort of thing. This happens. They had a protest. They had a protest. One of their Black Lives Matter groups that a lot of people, it was like a protest that was being planned in St. Louis. A lot of people attended, and it turned out that the creator of that lives in Russia, works for the Russian government, even though it's all for Americans in St. Louis. And in a different division of that building, they had an alt-right group, and they had a protest, and they happened to plan their protest to be right next door. And all those Americans showed up, and a ton of them, got into fights and stuff and scuffles. Yet both of the creators of both events were paid by the Russian state and live in Russia. So this is an example of how Putin, even though he's pretty far right, he's totally happy to promote the far left, the Green Party, the BLM people within America, because he doesn't actually care if the far left wins in America or the far right wins in America, because he knows that each one of them despises American interests. Each one of them despises capitalism. Each one of them despises liberalism. And each one of them is totally happy to do nothing while he storm rolls over Europe and the Middle East to expand his empire of blood. So they're all anti-neocon, for example. They're all anti-neoconservative, and he knows that. That's why he works with any of them. So, and I'm not saying that those people that showed up at the protests on either side were like, oh yeah, let's help the Russians. The point is, just as the case of the Vietnam War, a lot of well-meaning, useful idiots will do the bidding of the KGB, and such was the case in like 2019 in that example. There's more of this, but it's very clear. Russia Today is mostly a progressive news network, yet they're funded by a far-right fascist petrol state. Why is that? And that's because progressives in America want to undermine American security interests, which helps fascist Russia's security interests. So that's what this comes down to. Right. So
there's this group of people, the Russians, they are infiltrating our society.
Well, the Kremlin. They are
undermining our social institutions. They are making us militarily weak. But us neoconservatives, we are the strong. We are the brave, and we stand against them, which is why they fear us. What the fuck do you sound like right now, dude?
Well, I'm not saying they necessarily fear neocons, but they respect neocons. Like, it's the same as Ronald Reagan. The reason why they respected Reagan, even though he was their enemy, was because they're like, well, look, he loves his country. He's not a useful idiot for us. They don't actually... Here's the thing. Putin doesn't actually respect you. He doesn't respect any of these lefties. He sees them as useful idiots that would sell out their own country. Whereas if you guys were to actually go in Russia and say, we're here to help you, he would think you guys were spies, kind of like how he's suspicious about Edward Snowden. Now, he'll take Edward Snowden and say, okay, this is a good propaganda victory, but you think he trusts him? No, the Russians are always suspicious of outsiders. That's how they are, right? So if you betray your own country to go inside with them, they're not going to be impressed. They're going to think you might be a spy because you were willing to sell out your own country. How do you know that you're not going to sell out them now? So this is the point. So is Putin scared of the neocons? Not really, but he respects neocons because neocons are fighters like he is for their own side, right? So he can respect strength.
You're talking about this like vast conspiracy theory. I mean, like,
it's not conspiracy theory. This is verified. The U.S. intelligence looked into this, and you look in the IP addresses. It was also backed up by open source intel, and I believe Bellingcat, if I recall correctly, had a piece about this as well. No. We know that the
Black
Internet
Lives
Research,
Matter, the alt-right, they're all managed by the Russians. They're
not individual people, not all those masses who go there, but the leader, the leadership. Yeah, the leadership. Yeah.
The Russians are the puppet master, which is why we must nuke them. Why we must erase them.
Well, no, I'm not calling for a nuclear war with Russia right now. Are you crazy? I was talking about the 1950s.
Oh yeah, back then when we had the chance, we should have wiped them out.
Well, yeah, they have like 7,000 nukes right now. I'm not advocating for a nuclear war with Russia. I want to be clear about that.
You have the same pathology. You have the same pathology as the very people you criticize. You have this sort of conspiracy puppet master ideology where Russia is behind the curtain on everything that's wrong with the world.
No, except
and then your solution to it is genocide. That is fundamentally what you're talking about.
Wait. Hold on a second. So my solution,
the Russians is genocide.
Hold on. So my solution. I didn't know that the Communist Party was a race, but okay. So my solution to Russian
Because that's what
interference.
nukes would only target the communists.
Russian interference in the 2020 and 2016 presidential election, Russian interference in American and Western culture at large, Russian interference in terms of playing different radical movements against themselves to stoke divisions and undermine trust in democracy. All this stuff. You think my solution to it is we do a first strike in 2021 on Russia? Then why do I have all these videos talking about how we can bankrupt them by drilling huge oil in Canada and Texas and Alaska and shipping it to Europe for like less than what it's even worth, basically, to get them off of Russian dependence so that we can bankrupt Russia? Why would I even go to the effort of thinking up creative ways to bankrupt Putin if I was just going to say, oh, well, no, let's just nuke him? You think that's my solution in 2021?
I thought that was your solution going into this, but like,
because you didn't do your research. You watched a couple
videos.
Yeah, I'm not saying watch all of them. You probably could have watched the ones that were relevant to nuclear strategy and Russia specifically. I've never advocated. Look, when I said a nuclear war was winnable, when I said a nuclear war was winnable. When I said that a nuclear war was winnable, that was in reference to North Korea, and you interpreted that as Russia because you must have thought, oh, well, that's insane. This guy's insane, so he must want to nuke Russia, Dr. Strangelove style. No, my focus is mostly on North Korea because North Korea. It's wild
that you say that when we spent the first half of this conversation talking about nuking Russia in the
1950s. Hey, SpaceHosh, what year is it right now?
Look. You're still going to the same problem for the same thing. Oh, that was such a gotcha. That was such a gotcha. You just wanted to nuke all the Russians back in the 50s.
I just owned you epic style because you were trying to straw man me based on one of my positions that I haven't actually advocated was a relevant position for about 65 years, roughly. So, cool straw man, bro. I called you out. You just got owned. You just got owned epic style. And so all you can say now is genocide. Really? Drilling more oil than them is genocide because that is.
Hold on a second. What did you say?
Drilling more oil and gas and shipping it to Europe, to Germany and all these countries for like dirt cheap to undermine Russia and bankrupt them. That's genocide now.
That's not what I said. See, you're straw manning me now.
No. But you're straw manning me because you're going to be like, oh, well, I'm talking about nukes. And I'm like, yeah. In 1953, it's not 1953 anymore, is it, kiddo?
You seem like an ideas guy. You got everything figured out. Back in 1953, we should have just killed all the Russians. Now we're going to do this epic economic plan that I know what to do. I have it all figured out. Nobody else.
Well, I'll tell you this. I'd rather have ideas than do the memes like you're doing right now because you're doing many memes, bro. You're doing many memes, bro. So
I don't respect people who use that kind of language.
And I don't really respect people that would say, "Oh, Dresden," and basically do the same memes as the traditional revival, as the traditional revival grapers. Dresden. Hey, I got news for you about Dresden. Hashtag cope, bro. Because guess what? The fascists lost. They got their ass kicked. That's what happens when you start a war with Europe.
This is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. You are so detached from the things you're talking about. It is all like a little game.
No, you.
Cope about hundreds of thousands of people dying. Hundreds of thousands of people.
Well, yeah, I know my geography. It was spooky number, big number bad, big number spooky. Let's ignore the fate of potentially millions of generations that could be born under misery and gulags, and say North Korea or wherever
America
else.
Will last millions of years over here. Come on.
Well, look, if America's the only country, like serious, follow. Like I know it's big brain for small. I know it's big brain logic for small, for small SpaceHosh brain. But you got to follow me with this, right? So. Let's say it's early 1950s. U.S. goes in, Russia's gone. U.S. establishes world hegemony and says, if anybody else ever tries to get nukes again, they're done some before they can even think about enriching uranium in the first place at weapons grade level. America's laid down the law. Within a few hundred or 1,000 years, we got basically a world federation. Well, look, this is relevant. Or just outright United States, or just outright. or just outright United States, not even the United States of America, just now it's United States because it's the world. At that point,
wow,
at that point, no matter where you're born,
and
no matter what year, and no matter what year, and no matter what year you're born in, you're going to, no matter what year you're born in, no matter which part of the planet you're born in, you'll be. Can you try listening for 5 seconds, kiddo?
It's a joke.
No matter what, you're not good at this. You've actually got to follow. See, here's the problem, right?
Sure, I'm not good at online debate.
So here's the deal. So no matter what year you're born in, no matter where in the world you're born, you'll never have to worry about living under communism, secret police, gulags, misery, starvation, communism, fascism, whatever. You'll be able to live your own truth. You'll have sexual freedom. You'll have economic prosperity and opportunity. You'll have everything. The world is at your oyster. And that will be the case forevermore because nobody could ever hope to challenge the American order because the American order will have consolidated nuclear monopoly. And you talk about it hysterically as if it would be the end of the world. My dude, look at this graph. We're talking about 1953. Does that look like the end of the world to you? That's barely any warheads exchanged at all, bro. You are hysterical. You honestly think that a war with Pakistan and India, look, that would be very deadly in the region. Don't get me wrong, but you actually think that would just nuclear winter, game over, it's over. Consider this, right?
You've been ranting for like 5 minutes.
Okay, sure. Go for it. Let's see what you can do. Let's see what you can do. Yeah, no, you're doing the meme.
Are you gonna let me speak? Are you gonna be a big boy? Okay, so you're assuming what you can control. You have this whole planned out where America has this nuclear domination for centuries, for millions of years into the end of the world. You have this. It's like a civilization game to you, where you're moving your little pieces around. But that's not how the real world works. You're talking about maintaining a hegemony through nuclear domination. That doesn't sound like
base democracy for all, forever. You're
unhinged. You are an unhinged person.
You want to have a world that is forever. You want to have a world that is forever divided between free countries and enslaved countries. Oh, because NATO's fascist. The LGBT flag is fascist. Democracy is fascist. This is
the fast wave.
No. That's neocon wave, dude. That's neocon wave. That's Hawk wave. That's Hawk wave. That's Hawk wave. Dude, that's Hawk wave. Does gay rights and democracy worldwide look like fascism to you, dude? I literally would have nuked fascists, bro. I literally support Harry Truman nuking fascists, bro. So you don't. It's funny how you're like a far leftist who's butthurt that fascists got firebombed. That's never not funny to me. The red-brown alliance is real. The red-brown alliance is real.
Children had their skin peeled off.
Yeah. And it was a total war, bro. It was a total war, bro. You honestly don't live in the real world. You only have pathetic appeals to pathos. You only have emotional appeals. You even admitted you didn't do your research on nuclear war because that's insane. Who thinks about that? You said we can't comprehend it. I've read many papers going over specifics of nuclear weapons from the United States Department of Energy, D&D classified, formerly classified, now declassified stuff for the last 30 years, roughly. This stuff is out there and available. And, Alex Wellerstein, he's broken it down and made a map of it, an app that you can play around with and visualize things for yourself. This stuff is out there. Many people out there now are aware of the effects of nuclear weapons. And you talk about it as, one nuke goes off, unwinnable, end of the world, game over. Not only is it unwinnable, but also a nuclear winter. You've got to try to graduate from grade school and actually try to have a big boy conversation right here, because all I'm getting right now is coping and moping that your comrades of the reactionary side got firebombed at Dresden and got firebombed at Tokyo and got incinerated elsewhere. I mean, let's be real. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were military targets that civilians happened to live in. It was a total war. So what I got a question for you, SpaceHosh. So I got a special a question for you, SpaceHosh. Where do you think submarines and tanks and guns come from? Do they spawn from nowhere, or are they produced in factories and cities? Question.
I understand how total war works.
Okay, but apparently you're not willing to be comfortable with that.
That was probably one of the most inhuman things I've ever heard. You talk about this thing from your chair, your little chicken hawk chair.
Oh, here we go. Here we go. Oh, dude, you're doing every meme right now. You're doing every meme right now. You're doing every meme right now.
I don't have any respect for anybody who talks like that. Let me speak.
Well, okay, but I don't actually have respect for far leftists who are upset that Dresden got wrecked. Okay.
I care about people getting killed. I think people getting firebombed is bad. Dresden, sure, they were sure. I think Dresden is sort of on the edge there because of the nature, but in there was a sense of okay. Let me finish my thought. So you're talking about that was probably one of the most inhuman things I've ever heard, because you talk about it like it's some sort of like game. Like you talk about like I bring up the number. Let me finish my. You keep on interrupting me, man.
Cool, straw man, bro. Yeah, no, you've been interrupting me the whole night.
You go on these 5-minute rants, and I don't ever interrupt you, and you just keep on.
Yeah, no, will stand for the record as people watch this that statement was incorrect. So
sure, but you go on these long inhuman rants where you talk about slaughtering millions of people like it's some sort of like equation where you figure it out and the United States will rule after that. You bring up your little conservative or fash wave memes or whatever about that, but you're talking about genocide. You're talking about mass slaughter on a nuclear scale, like it's some sort of like it's you're so separated from it. It doesn't exist. This is what I'm talking about.
No, you know what? You know who's separated right now? You're separated from having lived in North Korea. You've never lived in a communist regime. You don't know what kind of hell it is to just try to survive one day under communism. To you, the end of the world, nukes. I'll tell you this, I'd rather die in a nuclear die in a nuclear blast. I'd rather die in a nuclear blast than live under communism. I'd rather die in a nuclear blast than live under communism or fascism. Democracy, give me democracy or give me death. Give me freedom or give me death, motherfucker.
So every single person that doesn't abide by that deserves that fate. People who would rather survive in the world that they live in deserves to be nuked. According is that your logic? People who live in these countries deserve to be annihilated, to have their families watched before them, like get fucking incinerated. Is that what you want? That's what's important to you?
So there's only one country that I advocate for actual. So no. You just asked me a question, bro. And I'm going to answer that. So this is the part where you sit down and you listen. So there's only one country in the world. Out of all the countries in the world, there's only one country in the world where we're at the position of last resort and where it's feasible, where nuclear weapons are on the table. And John Bolton has even said this, that all options are on the table, and that is North Korea. And that's North Korea. You don't see me advocating to nuke China, to nuke Russia, to nuke random countries. And even in the case of North Korea, it's a counterforce strike anyway. It was talking about cities. Cool straw man, bro. You think nukes and you think counter value. I mean, bro,
your solution to people living in totalitarianism, to being brutalized by their government, is to murder them, is to incinerate their homes, is to level everything that is in the society.
So when did I advocate? So when did I advocate to drop a nuke on Pyongyang? Because there's a difference between a command and control bunker or topol systems, etc.
How would you take out North Korea without doing that? How would you launch nukes where people don't live? Are you kidding me?
Well, no. Some people are going to die. Yeah, some people are going to die. Dude, how are you in the Navy and you don't recognize that collateral damage occurs in war? The point is you try to minimize collateral damage, but North Korea...
That's what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They couldn't minimize it.
Those were targeted at industrial populated centers. Nobody's arguing. So nobody's arguing to target North Korean cities. That's the point. That's a straw man, because you went in with all these assumptions and didn't actually do your goddamn research. The fact of the matter, SpaceHosh, is that you had 3 weeks to do your research tonight. And I'm thinking Ollie did more research. I'm thinking that Ollie did more research than you. So at this point, this is nothing more than a little monkey chimping out who did not do his research. You're the one
talking about murdering millions of people.
That's what happens in a total war. You don't like it, don't start it, basically. So that's the deal.
Living under totalitarian regimes.
Cry me a river about Dresden. You can go and You can go and cuddle with all the Groiper 1488 69 boys
What
and
the
be
fuck are you
upset
talking
about
Any
my
normal person who
traditionalism
listens to this
revival,
conversation doesn't even know what the fuck you're talking about.
my traditionalism
I'm talking about
revival
people
about
dying,
how
and your response
Dresden
is to go on these fucking
about
internet memes or
about
whatever.
how
I don't fucking
Dresden
care.
got firebombed, about how Dresden got firebombed, Crimea River, Nazis got firebombed, big boo-hoo. Guess what?
Children are
London got bombed, bro. London got bombed, bro, and
Sure,
they
that was
started it.
bad.
So
I think that was
so
bad.
we are wrapping this up. Nothing
Oh,
more
you're running
productive
away
is
now.
coming from
You
this.
don't
So
want to talk about this.
this has been it. And
fucking human.
look, I've already got the win. We got Minecraft here. Minecraft doesn't even really get along with me, and he's like, "Yeah, Kevin gets the win." Minecraft and I, look, Minecraft and I have a lot of political disagreements, right?
This is just another thing where you play your little game.
My little games. So freedom and democracy, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are games. Look, you are separated by generations and by continents from the misery of what it means to live in a totalitarian communist system, and yet here you are saying no, let's leave them as their status quo forever and have those people live in misery forever, in perpetuity. Oh, they're being murdered. Yeah, collateral damage happened. Hey, collateral damage happened in Iraq, and guess what? Yes, some innocents died. And guess what? The people that are alive in Iraq now and all the generations that will ever be born there are infinitely better off than they were if they were born under Saddam's rape and tyranny. So we are wrapping this up. You are done, son. You are done. You are done, son. You are done, son. You're done, son. That is a win for Kevin Castley. That is a win for the hashtag nuke pill. That is a win for the nuke pill. This was an absolute shit show, and you are done. So have a good one. Absolute clown. Absolute clown. Absolute clown. So we're gonna take that as a dub. We got Kev Boy for the win right here. I mean, that's how this usually goes. Even my opponents have said to me, they're like, well, you gotta give Kevin some credit. He knows his nukes. This guy spends 3 years training to keep a nuclear reactor operating, which, that's a cool job. That's a useful job. Don't get me wrong. And he thinks he knows everything about nuclear warfare. He thinks he knows everything about history. Oh, he's a history student. Oh, he's got a far left professor. And oh, he's far left. Okay. So comrade Horseshoe tonight, because you might say, why Horseshoe? Well, because he had a lot of tears to cry for those Nazis who died. That's pretty funny. Isn't that funny how a lot of these like tanky types and Westphalian types, they have a lot of tears to cry for fascists. Now, keep in mind, the fascists murdered the communists. But the communists today get so upset when you talk about killing fascists. They call that neoconservatism. You want to go over there and bomb fascists? No, it's like, yeah, but those fascists would have killed you. So fascists don't really like communists very much, but he has a lot of tears to cry for the Third Reich. Very unfortunate. He has a lot of tears to cry for Japan too, Imperial Japan. For me, I got tears of laughter, Doug. Like I'm lolling and balling right now. I'm on top of the world, bro. So we're gonna wrap this one up as another dub for me. And if you think you can do better, actually, most people can probably do better than that. Look, I've had very disagreeable debates that have been pretty cordial, actually. This is more of the Kyle Frank variety. Look, I debated Raymore Asame, for example. She and I disagree on a lot. She's basically a fascist, and yet we had a pretty cordial, polite conversation for our debate. We actually had 2 debates. You know who's not getting a second debate? Mr. Clown Show over there, SpaceHosh. He's not getting a second debate. Now, you might say, well, don't you want another dub? Look, I can get another dub. I'd rather have the next dub be more productive for the viewers. We get our popcorn debate. This is your popcorn debate. We get these now and then when goofballs try to come in here and try to school me, and they clearly haven't done their research. And then when I call them out on not doing their research, and we'll save this for the post show in about 10 minutes, then they have to resort to ad homs. Like, no, but you're insane and inhuman and everything. That's, my pathos. And everybody's well familiar. I'm pretty good at nuking arguments to pathos pretty well. So I'm going to say I think he got nuked tonight, honestly. I mean, I can feel the ouch Like I'm 100 miles away and I can feel the heat from that fireball, man. So, oh man, he got nuked. Yeah, no, Chad Master right here. Superpower broadcasting win. Yeah, no. I went Chad mode tonight, as I usually do, but I mean, come on, you asked for it. Look, with these debates, I'll say this before we wrap this up, because we'll have a more detailed breakdown in the post show, and that'll be live on this channel in about 5 to 10 minutes, roughly. I gotta go and get some water and check my phone, the Facebooks, all that kind of stuff, all that swag stuff. So here's the deal. With all these debates, basically, we can either do this the hard way or the funny way, right? We can either do this the easy way or the funny way, rather, I should say. So what's the easy way? The easy way is, look, even if you're a Nazbol, even if you're a fascist like Uncle Thomas or Ray Murasame, even if you're like pro-China or pro-Nazbol gang, pro-Russia, like Uncle Thomas or Ray Murasame with China, you can come here on this channel where I'm like the king of the neocons or whatever as they call me, where I'm like this liberal to the core and I want to spread liberalism everywhere. And we'll actually have a polite conversation where we can mostly just get along. And like, don't get me wrong, we have our disagreements. Like we disagree with each other, but we can have a conversation. We don't really interrupt each other very often. And we kind of say, yeah, okay, I see what you're saying, but like, look at it from this perspective, that kind of thing. That's the easy way. And look, you can say, oh, you platform the bad actors. I don't actually care about platforming. I don't care. I'll platform whoever. Like you could literally right now be like a Catholic Groiper, monarchist fascist and come here. And if you're polite with me and you can actually have like a decent conversation and everything, and we can maintain that, we'll disagree. We'll have a contentious debate, but it'll go pretty smooth. And that's what we had with Ray a couple times. And we also, look, we debated Uncle Thomas twice. I probably disagree with Uncle Thomas more than that guy. Probably, I would wager. I mean, Uncle Thomas is an actual Nazbol. But Uncle Thomas gets to come back because he can actually have a professional debate and actually be productive, right? Now, I still won those debates, so it's still a dub no matter what. It's not really funny, but I find it more productive for the audience. But the audience also loves blood sports, and we do blood sports. And the audience also loves a quick and easy dub, and the lols and the memes. So we got some memes tonight. This is a meme factory here for sure. And I don't even really have to do that much. I kind of just sit back and drink water, and they do the memes themselves. So what else was I going to say about that? Oh yeah, so we can do this the easy way as I described, or the funny way. What's the funny way? What you just saw tonight. You might be like, why is it the funny way? Watch it. If you just showed up here, watch it, and then you'll see why it was the funny way. It's pretty funny. We're going to wrap this up with a clown alert in honor of the contender who goes down tonight as Superpower Broadcasting claims another dub in the belt. Okay, and so I will be back in about 5 to 10 minutes for the post show. So stay tuned for that, absolutely. And thank you for watching, everybody. And if you think you can do better, DM me over on Twitter. I think most of you can probably do better than that. It was a little bit of a low bar. So, you kind of hate to see it, but like, I'm kind of grinning right now. I like my dubs. I like the memes. I like, sometimes long day at work, you kind of want to just kick back and just, laugh. It's pretty good for some funny times. So you get those meme moments for sure. So see you in about 5 to 10 minutes. As Mycroft says, cheers. See you in the post show.